Hi friends, today we will discuss a very important topic, that is dialysis. You can download the PDF notes of this lecture from the app MediLectures. Link will be provided in the description. So friends, dialysis is a life support therapy that filters and purifies the blood using a machine. So the main aim of dialysis is to normalize the electrolytes and acid base status, as well as to remove the solute and extracellular volume. So in this lecture, we will first discuss intro, then what are the indications of dialysis. We will then discuss in detail about hemodialysis, peritoneal dialysis, what is the prognosis in patients of end-stage renal disease, and the dialysis in acute kidney injury. So friends, dialysis may be required for treatment of either acute kidney injury or chronic kidney disease. When we consider the etiology of end-stage renal disease, the most common cause is diabetes mellitus, which is responsible for 45% of total cases. Now the second most common is, or rather we shall say, the second most common association is hypertension, which is associated in 30% cases. Why are we saying association? Because we don't know whether it is a cause or a consequence of end-stage renal disease, since it can lead to both end-stage renal disease and can be a consequence because of this. The other causes can be glomerulonephritis, polycystic kidney disease, obstructive uropathy, etc. Now guys, one gene is associated with very high incidence of end-stage renal disease in certain populations like African Americans. So can anyone tell which is this gene which is responsible for high incidence of end-stage renal disease in these patients? The name of gene is ApoL1 gene. Now, when we consider the treatment options available for end-stage renal disease, we have hemodialysis, which can be in-center hemodialysis or home-based hemodialysis. Now, in-center hemodialysis is the most common modality of treatment which is used for these patients, and it is used by more than 90% of patients of end-stage renal disease. Now, peritoneal dialysis can also be used, but it is a continuous process and is usually less efficient in terms of solute clearance. It can be done in two ways, that is continuous ambulatory peritoneal dialysis or continuous cyclic peritoneal dialysis. The third and best treatment, if available, is renal transplantation. Now, before starting the individual discussion of hemodialysis and peritoneal dialysis, let's see what are the indications of dialysis in common. So, dialysis is needed whenever a patient is having uremic symptoms or hyperkalemia, which is unresponsive to conservative measures, persistent extravascular volume expansion, which is despite use of diuretic therapy, acidosis, which is refractory to medical therapy, bleeding diastasis, and finally creatinine clearance or estimated GFR, which is less than 10 ml per minute per 1.72 meter square of body surface area. So all these are the indications of dialysis. So since the very first indication of dialysis was the symptoms of uremia. So what are the symptoms of uremia? These include nausea, vomiting, anorexia, dysgeusia, that is abnormal taste, pruritus or itching, alterations in sleep, that is patient is usually insomniac and there is daytime hypersomnolence. There is sensation of being cold and cognitive changes. Now there are certain signs of uremia. These include shallow discoloration of the skin, ammonia odor, pericardial friction rub or effusion, myoclonus or seizures, foot or wrist drop, which is uremic motor neuropathy, and prolonged bleeding time or platelet dysfunction. So if any of these clinical features of uremia present, this is a topmost indication for dialysis, whether be hemodialysis or peritoneal dialysis. So let's begin our discussion with hemodialysis. What happens is, first of all, there is blood from arterial side of the AV fistula, graft or catheter So these AV fistula or AV graft or catheter is the hemodialysis axis from which the blood will be taken and will be given back to the body. So blood from the arterial side of the AV fistula, graft or catheter is passed through a dialyzer. So this is the dialyzer. In dialysis there is fluid that is dialysate. So it is shown by this green color. This fluid which is dialysate is separated from the blood through a semi-permeable membrane. This is a semi-permeable membrane. Now solute and fluid transfer occurs across this semi-permeable membrane to normalize the electrolytes, fluid and acid-base status of the blood. Now when the blood is filtered, it is transferred back through the venous side of AV fistula, graft or catheter, whichever is used, and this process usually is done for 3 to 8 hours depending on the time. So this is the brief introduction about hemodialysis. Let's see the details. Now the main aim of hemodialysis is to remove the excess of solutes and excess of volume which are not being removed by the kidneys. So what is the mechanism of solute transport? First mechanism is diffusion. It occurs through the semi-permeable membrane down the concentration gradient from the circulation to dialysate. So the solute transport occurs from higher concentration to lower concentration, that is from the blood circulation to the dialysate, and it depends upon concentration gradient, membrane surface area and the mass transfer coefficient. For example, urea being a small molecule will be filtered more easily than the creatinine, which is a large molecule. Now what is the mechanism of volume removal? It is through ultrafiltration. Now this ultrafiltration is same as that occurs in glomerulus, but in glomerulus there was positive hydrostatic pressure from the side of afferent arteriole. But this ultrafiltration in case of hemodialysis is due to negative hydrostatic pressure which is generated from the dialysate site, Now due to this volume removal, there is additional removal of some solute, with solutes being swept along with the water across the semi-permeable dialysis membrane. So since the water is coming with a negative hydrostatic pressure, it will also swept along some solute along with it. This is known as solvent drag or phenomena of convection. So it is the second mechanism by which the solute can transport in hemodialysis. So solute transport occurs through diffusion and solvent drag, that is convection, and the volume removal occurs through ultrafiltration due to negative hydrostatic pressure. Now hemodialysis has three essential components, that is dialyzer, dialysate and blood delivery system. Now dialyzer is a plastic chamber which is most commonly of hollow fiber type. So the most common dialyzer used is hollow fiber dialyzer. It is composed of bundles of capillary tubes like this. There are capillary tubes in which the blood runs, and outside the capillary tube there is dialysate. So the filtration occurs through the semi-permeable membrane which separates blood and dialysate. Now this semi-permeable membrane is made up of biocompatible material which is polysulfonyl material. Earlier cellulose membranes were used which used to activate the complement cascade. Why? Because these were bioincompatible. So now polysulfonyl membranes are used and these do not activate complement cascade. There is perfusion of blood and dialysate simultaneously at very high flow rates which help in the exchange of solute. Now the second component is dialysate, which is the fluid used during dialysis. The potassium concentration of dialysis is kept at 0 to 4 milliequivalent per liter depending upon the pre-dialysis serum potassium concentration. Usually it is not kept at 0 to 1 because due to increased risk of death due to arrhythmia which occurs due to sudden potassium shifts. If we are keeping the potassium concentration very low, there can be risk of arrhythmia due to sudden potassium shifts. So it is kept at a range of 2 to 4. Now calcium concentration is kept at around 2.5 milliequivalent per liter, but higher concentrations are also used, especially in cases of hypocalcemia due to secondary hyperparathyroidism and hungry bone syndrome following parathyroidectomy. So in these cases, calcium is kept at a higher concentration. Now sodium concentration is usually kept at 136 to 140 milliequivalent per liter. Now there is a concept known as sodium modeling. So the patients who frequently develop hypotension during dialysis, sodium modeling is used in such patients. This is used to counterbalance the urea related osmotic gradient. So for example, if we are keeping the sodium concentration low, it can lead to rapid shift of sodium and lead to hypotension. So this is used to avoid hypotension. In this, initially the sodium is kept high around 145 to 155 milliequivalent per liter, and it is lowered slowly to isotonic levels, that is around 136 to 140 at the end of the dialysis session. But we should keep in mind that this sodium modeling can also lead to positive sodium balance, which leads to increased thirst, and this sodium modeling should be especially avoided in patients who are already hypertensive and have large interdialytic weight gain. Large interdialytic weight gain. So sodium modeling should be avoided in such patients. Now coming on to the third part, that is blood delivery system. It consists of extracorporeal circuit, which is AV tubing, that is arteriovenous tubing, and the dialysis axis. So dialysis axis in case of hemodialysis can be AV fistula, AV graft or AV catheter, and cases of peritoneal dialysis, this dialysis axis is peritoneal catheter. We'll discuss all these in detail. Now after we have discussed all these three components, there is dialysis machine, which is the big machine used in dialysis unit. So it consists of blood pump, which moves the blood from the access site through the dialyzer and again pumps back to the patient. The rate of blood flow is typically 250 to 450 ml per minute. So this rate is very high, therefore we have to do formation of AV fistula to arterialize the vein so that we can get this high flow. So this flow of 250 to 450 ml per minute is depending upon the type and integrity of vascular access. The other part is dialysis solution delivery system, which dilutes the concentrated dialysate with water and monitors the temperature, conductivity and the flow of dialysate. Third one is safety monitors. So these are the images of the components of dialysis. This is the dialyzer. When we do the cross section, it appears like this, in which there are hollow fibers which are filled with blood. The blood from the body comes and is in contact with dialysate but separated through a semi-permeable membrane. So the solute and water transport occurs through this semi-permeable membrane. After this transport occurs, the blood is returned back to the body, and there are two ports from the dialysis machine which helps in removing the used dialysis solution and pumping the fresh dialysis solution. And this is the dialysis machine which has safety monitors, pump and dialysis solution delivery system. So this is the dialyzer connected with the machine. These are the AV tubing sets which are used to connect the access site to the dialyzer. Now let's discuss the hemodialysis vascular access in detail. It is the one through which blood is obtained for the hemodialysis. These can be of three types: Either there can be a arteriovenous fistula, or we can make a arteriovenous graft, or there can be insertion of vascular catheter. So let's discuss these one by one in detail. So an example of arteriovenous fistula is Brachia seminofistula, which is end to side fistula between cephalic vein and radial artery. So in this there is arterialization of the vein and it becomes a high flow circulation. So we can assess high blood flow around 500 ml per minute, and also can insert a large needle of 15 gauge. So it is the preferred access of choice because of the advantages like it has the highest long-term patency and longest lifespan because of least risk of thrombosis. Also it has lowest infection rate. So in this there is AV fistula between the radial artery and cephalic vein, in which the blood is taken from the arterial side and pumped back to the vein side. Mainly because it is the arterialization of vein, so the vein becomes also a high output circulation and it can be taken from the arterial side of the vein. Now for some reason the formation of AV fistula is not possible. For example, the vasculature is not permitting formation of AV fistula, or if the fistula is formed is unable to mature, we use arteriovenous graft. This AV graft is kept between artery and vein and it is made up of polytetrafluoroethylene. Now this graft has a high risk of complications, like there is high risk of thrombosis and higher rates of infection as compared to AV fistula. Now whenever fistula as well as graft fails, we can perform catheter guided angioplasty. We can pass a catheter and dilate the stenosis if it has failed. So catheter guided angioplasty can be used to dilate the stenosis. Now if both the AV fistula and graft have failed or are not possible to anastomize, we use vascular catheter. So these vascular catheters are tunneled under the skin because this tunneling leads to lower risk of infection than non-tunneled catheter. So these are tunneled under the skin. The most common vein is internal jugular vein. Other veins which can be used are external jugular, femoral vein and subclavian. These are the least desirable access because of the highest risk of infection. And in this also the femoral vein has the highest risk among these. Subclavian vascular access should be avoided in most of the conditions because stenosis is very frequent in this subclavian vein. Now if the stenosis occurs, it will also prohibit the permanent vascular access in the ipsilateral extremity in future. So for example, we are planning to make a AV fistula graft later in the extremity. If the subclavian vein gets stenosed, then it will not be possible in future to make a AV fistula or graft in that ipsilateral extremity in the future. So it should be avoided, and this vascular catheter is the least preferred vascular access for hemodialysis. Now this hemodialysis process consists of pumping heparinized blood into the dialyzer, and the flow rate of this heparinized blood is 250 to 450 ml per minute. Also the dialysate flows in the counter current direction to that of blood, and the flow rate of this dialysate is almost double, around 500 to 800 ml per minute. Now the efficiency of dialysis depends upon blood and dialysate flow, also the dialyzer efficiency in removing the solutes. Now what is the dose of dialysis? So this dose of dialysis is derivation of fractional urea clearance during the single treatment. So it depends mainly on the patient size, residual kidney function, dietary protein intake, what is the degree of anabolism or catabolism, and the presence of comorbid conditions. Now the types of hemodialysis include in-center dialysis, which is used in 90% of patients, and home-based dialysis. So in-center is the most common method, in which the usually thrice weekly regimens are used, in which each sitting has a duration of 4 hours. Or we can do nocturnal dialysis also thrice weekly, in which there is a slow dialysis in 6 to 8 hours. On the other hand, home-based dialysis regimens can be short daily, in which there are 6 per week sessions of 2 to 3 hours, nocturnal 3 to 6 per week with 6 to 8 hour sessions, and conventional thrice weekly of 4 hours. The difference is just this dialysis occurs in home-based dialysis machine. Now, what all can be the complications during hemodialysis? There are certain acute complications and some chronic complications. So the acute complications include hypotension, infection, muscle cramps, anaphylactic reaction, and dialysis disequilibrium syndrome. So the hypotension is the most common acute complication, which is common in diabetes mellitus. And what is the management if patient undergoes hypotension during hemodialysis? First, we discontinue the ultrafiltration. We give 100 to 250 ml of normal saline. We can give salt-free albumin, and excessive and rapid fluid removal should be avoided. We can also give a alpha-1 agonist, midodrine, which leads to vasoconstriction, systemic vasoconstriction, and corrects hypotension. Now the infection, the most common organism responsible for infection is Staphylococcus, which occurs through the skin of the patient. Muscle cramps can occur due to changes in muscle perfusion because of excessive rapid volume removal. Now when we consider the anaphylactoid reactions, these are common during the first use of dialysis, during the first time dialysis, and most commonly these occur because of bioincompatible semi-permeable membrane. So the anaphylactoid reaction can be of two types, type A and type B. This type A is IgE mediated reaction, which occurs within the first few minutes, and it is usually due to exposure to ethylene oxide, which is used for the sterilization of the dialyzer, and the treatment includes adrenaline and giving steroids. On the other hand, type B reaction is characterized by non-specific chest pain and back pain, and it is due to complement activation and cytokine release. And it usually relieves and resolves on its own. Now, dialysis disequilibrium syndrome can occur due to rapid changes in osmotic gradient of the brain. Now, after we have seen the acute complications of hemodialysis, the chronic complications include anemia, adynamic bone disease, aluminium induced dementia, since aluminium is used in the dialysis machine, and amyloidosis due to deposition of beta 2 microglobulin. So the amyloid which is deposited in hemodialysis is beta 2 microglobulin, because it is not filtered by the dialysis membrane. Therefore, it deposits in the body, leading to amyloidosis. Now, after we have discussed hemodialysis, let's come to our discussion on peritoneal dialysis. In peritoneal dialysis, the peritoneum acts as a semi-permeable membrane, and around 1.5 to 3 liter of dextrose containing solution is infused into the peritoneal cavity, and it is allowed to dwell for a set period of time, which is usually 2 to 4 hours. So what is the mechanism of solute transport? As with hemodialysis, first mechanism will be diffusion, and the second mechanism is solvent drag due to removal of volume. This solvent drag is also known as convection. Now when we consider mechanism of volume removal, it is same as hemodialysis due to ultrafiltration. But the cause of ultrafiltration is different. In hemodialysis, the ultrafiltration was occurring because of the negative hydrostatic pressure which was kept from the dialysate side. But in this, the ultrafiltration occurs due to osmosis, due to high dextrose concentration of the fluid which is given during peritoneal dialysis. Now the rate of diffusion diminishes with time. As the peritoneal dialysis occurs, the rate of diminution starts diminishing with time and eventually stops when the equilibrium occurs between the plasma and the dialysate. Now the rate of peritoneal solute transport varies from patient to patient and it may be altered in cases of infection, that is peritonitis, since there will be inflammation and vasodilatation, there will be increased transport. It can be altered by drugs or physical factors such as position and exercise. So these are the factors which affect rate of diffusion in cases of peritoneal dialysis. Now the absorption of this dialysate occurs through peritoneal capillaries and goes to the lymphatics. Now the peritoneal dialysis is of two types, that is CAPD and CCPD. So CAPD is continuous ambulatory peritoneal dialysis. In this, what happens is, if this is our peritoneum, abdomen, the dialysate is manually infused into the peritoneal cavity and it is exchanged for 3 to 5 times. So it is removed, then filled, then removed, then filled. And during night time, a nighttime dwell is kept in the peritoneal cavity. During night time, a dwell is kept during the peritoneal cavity, and usually in 3 to 5 cycles, there is complete removal of the solutes. On the other hand, in continuous cyclic peritoneal dialysis, this manual method of changing the dialysate is now automated. The exchanges are performed in an automated fashion. It is usually done at night and the patient is connected to an automated cycler that performs a series of exchange cycles when the patient sleeps. So it is connected to an automated cycler in which the dialysate can be automatically cycled. Now when we talk about the dialysate used in peritoneal dialysis, it is around 1.5 to 3 liters which is used. How it is different from dialysate used in hemodialysis? It is hypertonic. So the dialysate in peritoneal dialysis is hypertonic, which is responsible for driving solute and fluid removal. So what can be used? It is either dextrose or icodextrin. Now this icodextrin is a non-absorbable carbohydrate that can be used in place of dextrose, and it is better because it does more efficient ultrafiltration. So it is used as a last fill when we are filling it for the last time in CCPD, that is continuous cyclic peritoneal dialysis, and for the longest dwell in CAPD. So what can be the additional drugs which can be added to dialysate? It is heparin to avoid coagulation, antibiotics in cases of peritonitis, and insulin in cases of diabetes mellitus. Larger the volume of dialysate, more is the solute clearance during peritoneal dialysis. Now when we consider peritoneal cavity access, it is by peritoneal catheter. It is a flexible catheter which is made up of silicone rubber. It has numerous side holes at its distal end and there are 2 Dacron cuffs. These Dacron cuffs are placed in the pre-peritoneal plane and 2 cm from the skin surface. Now a peritoneal equilibrium test is conducted which divides the patients into low transporters, low average transporters, high average transporters and high transporters. Now what are these high transporters? In these patients there is rapid equilibration between the peritoneal fluid and dialysate. So these absorb more glucose and lose their efficiency of ultrafiltration early. These will require more frequent, shorter dwell time exchanges. So these will require the cycles. So in these patients, especially in high average and high transporters, we used continuous cyclic peritoneal dialysis. On the other hand, in low transporters, low average and some high average patients, we can use continuous ambulatory peritoneal dialysis. So this peritoneal equilibrium test is very important so that we can decide which type of peritoneal dialysis can be done. Now let's see what all complications can occur during peritoneal dialysis. The first complication is peritonitis. It is due to break in the sterile technique and it is diagnosed by increased peritoneal fluid leukocyte count more than 100 per millimeter cube. And out of these 100 leukocytes, at least 50% should be your neutrophils, 50% neutrophils. Now we can recall that this cutoff for spontaneous bacterial peritonitis was 250, more than equal to 250. So why is the cutoff for this peritoneal dialysis less? It is because of dextrose, because it provides suitable environment for bacteria to grow and flourish. Therefore, this cutoff is kept at 100. The clinical feature of peritonitis and the presentation is usually pain and the dialysate becomes cloudy dialysate. When we consider the most common organism, it is again Staphylococcus, but other organisms like fungus, mycobacterium and gram-negative organisms like Pseudomonas can also lead to peritonitis. Treatment includes IV or peritoneal antibiotics, and some severe cases we have to remove the catheter. Now not all infections are peritonitis. There can be some catheter associated non-peritonitis infections. These are also known as tunnel infections. So these tunnel infections can be mild or moderate. In mild cases, we give treatment like local antibiotics and silver nitrate, and in severe cases we require peritoneal or oral antibiotics as well as catheter removal. Now weight gain and hyperglycemia is very common because of the use of dextrose. Metabolic disturbances like hypoalbuminemia, hypoproteinemia can occur because these proteins and albumin are lost through the peritoneal membrane into the dialysate fluid. Now hernia can occur in patients who have muscle weakness, muscular dystrophy, etc. Now the major cause of death in end-stage renal disease patients is cardiovascular disease. Now what are the factors which determine the morbidity and mortality in patients of end-stage renal disease? It is the adequacy of solute removal by hemodialysis, adequacy of blood pressure control, volume control, anemia management, protein nutrition, control of hyperkalemia and management of renal bone disease. So these all things should be kept in mind in treating a patient with end stage renal disease. Now the AKI, the indications of dialysis include medical management, failed to control volume overload, hyperkalemia and acidosis, certain toxic ingestions and uremic complications. Now it is important to note that hemodialysis can itself lead to hypotension and precipitate AKI. Usually, the hemodialysis is initiated when blood urea nitrogen becomes more than 100 mg per deciliter, even in the absence of clinical features. Now for AKI, certain modes are invented like continuous renal replacement therapy. In this, renal replacement therapy is done for over 24 hours round the day. It is of two types. First is continuous veno-venous hemofiltration, in which the mechanism used is ultrafiltration for dialysis, and the second is continuous veno-venous hemodialysis. In this, the mechanism used is diffusion, and there is a hybrid of both these conditions which is known as CCVH-DF. This is continuous veno-venous hemodiafiltration, which used combination of both CVVH and CVVHD. Now it is preferred in patients who have severe hemodynamic instability, cerebral edema, and significant volume overload, since it is done for 24 hours and does not lead to rapid shifts in volume and solute. Now, if this 24 hours is more, we have made some alternatives like slow, low efficiency dialysis SLAD or extended daily dialysis. In this, the blood flow and dialysate flow is more than that of continuous renal replacement therapy. Flow is increased and time is decreased. Time is decreased around less than equal to 12 hours. So this is about dialysis in AKI, and we complete the lecture here.